I'm surprised that many of you are showing up. And I think I'm quite sure that today's presentation is like a really low-key version of a paper I'm giving next month at the American Academy of Religion. And my session is not expected to have about half the number of people here today. So, and these are supposed to be people who are like specialists in my field. So I don't know whether that's sad, something I should complain to the chair of the section I'm presenting in or something like that. Well, I'll have a month to sort it out. But yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. One student had a question. Is this going to be a book?
No.
Are you writing a book?
No, this is not going to be a book.
Okay.
For various reasons. Yeah, I know.
Okay, just yes or no is good.
I need to finish another book project first.
Okay.
So this is the story, a history of a church that I've gotten to know quite well. When you go to divinity school or seminary, as some of you might be doing, most schools require an internship, a ministry internship, and mine was no exception. And I was, to make a long story short, I was assigned this church. It is the First Chinese Presbyterian Church in New York City. And when I first showed up, I mean, this is the building they're located in. This is a very old building, 1819, and one of the three churches in Manhattan where if you go into a sanctuary and look above, there are still slave galleries. That is how old it is, and the church has preserved it partly as a memory to remind us of what has gone before, but the slave gallery is also where the AC equipment is located, so also useful for that. But the original location of this church is not this building. To help out, there is a red cross on the Google map there. It's kind of small, but for just a reference, this is located in Chinatown, Chinatown proper, in Manhattan. So this church was founded to serve the Chinese community, and it's located in Chinatown. So so far it makes sense. Right? But if you look back into its history, right, it's not quite that simple. There were a lot of moves, and some of the moves, especially one of them, is not expected. The church actually began, now it was founded in 1910, but it had a history before then as the Chinese mission and school of this church, the University Place Presbyterian Church. And it's located, now here you can see in the map there's a yellow square. That's historic Chinatown, right? Still there. The current Chinatown is much bigger than the original, but that's where most of the Chinese migrants would have lived. And you can see a red cross near, I wish my mouse can show up, but it's not showing up, but about maybe 10 blocks away. So it looks kind of far, but actually it's not. This is about a 15-20 minute walking distance from Chinatown. And most of the Chinese migrants, they lived in Chinatown, but they did not work just in Chinatown. They worked in the service industries, as in laundromats, in cleaning houses, and largely around the lower Manhattan area. So they don't, this is within walking distance. It's convenient for them. And what did this mission do? Well, it began as an outreach, but also an advocacy and this is going to sound weird, assimilation program. And what that really means is they provide classes for teaching English. That's really important. But also, this is how you behave in America. These are what the salad forks are, and all these other things. This is how you dress. This is how you wear a tie, right? And other things that would help you fit in to society. And this is not the only Chinese mission that does this. If you look at other Chinese mission programs around at this time. The one that comes to mind is the one in San Francisco. Now, the church in San Francisco, that's the oldest Asian American church in the United States. And they have a Chinese mission school called Cameron House. It's still there to this day. And they don't do English teaching for obvious reasons, but they do a lot of social justice advocacy. So in that sense, they preserve their mission. But in this case, they were focused on teaching English and helping Chinese migrants with issues with their landlords and other things. But most importantly, this is a church, so it's about evangelism, it's about proclaiming the gospel, right? And doing good things along the side. Now, this mission was founded around the 1850s, and it was led by missionaries to China. But in 1885, there is a Hui Qin who graduated from Lane Seminary in Ohio, and he became the first Chinese to lead the program. Right now, this is where the question for this paper arises. Now, he grew the program, and before long, there needs to be a building. And interestingly enough, the first location, the place where the church is founded, FCPC is the abbreviation of First Chinese Presbyterian Church. So where FCPC is first founded is all the way up at 31st Street. Now, I have the map here, right? And you can see the location. This is in Midtown. Now, you can't think about Midtown today as what it looked like in 1910. In 1910, this is a hugely residential area. This is a predominantly white area. Middle upper class. Now, really upper class. But in those days, you can buy a building there with some money. But one thing was interesting that didn't quite make sense to me was, well, if you're a church that's supposed to serve the Chinese community, why are you all the way up here in Midtown, right? Now, Midtown, today you can just sit the subway up there, but the subways weren't cheap back then. And it's not walking distance from Chinatown. So this was a question that sort of bothered me, I suppose, when I was serving there. And I was asking the elders because I was hoping they would know. And their answer is, well, I don't know, and don't know why that matters, because I guess I was the only person interested in the history of the church than they are. So this became something of a subject that I was looking into for the past few years. Now, I could go into a long discussion of the ins and outs of it, but why did they move so far away from Chinatown? I'm just going to cut to the chase and give you two reasons. The first is yellow peril, right? And yellow peril is this negative stereotyping of the migrant Chinese in the 1870s and the 1880s. And this played one important role in the decision for the church to be established up in Midtown. Now, the founder is Hui Qin, as you probably know. And it's interesting because he entered the United States through San Francisco in the 1870s, just as there was a wave of yellow peril sentiment sweeping through the nation. And so he was very much aware of this. And as an interesting side note, immigration is a topic that's in the news a lot, right? Illegal immigration, for example. But many of us don't know that the term illegal immigration first appeared in 1882, and it was applied to the Chinese migrants. A lot of the quotas for how many people can enter the country began with the immigration laws. And these laws were repealed in 1965. And so as a result, a lot of Asian Americans who moved into the United States after 1965, they have a very different story than people who were moving into the United States before 1882 or during the law's effective period. Now, another interesting thing is that you notice that this is his wife, Louisa, and no surprises, Louisa is a white woman. And you might be wondering, well, is this controversial in New York at the time? Absolutely. Every Presbyterian was scratching their head. Why would a white woman, middle-class woman, marry a Chinaman? And every Chinese person was, why would you marry someone who's not Chinese? But they made it work, believe it or not, or at least in the memoirs, they made it work. And they made a good pair to continually grow the church. Now, what are some things about yellow peril that really matters for our discussion today? Well, the first is there are common themes, right? And the first theme is that the Chinese are taking our jobs, right? They are essentially economic competitors, industrial competitors to the West. Right, and you can see here in this cartoon, right? You have oh, sorry, spoiled that one. You have two Chinese men, right, with their Chinese garb and holding machetes, right? One machete says chopsticks, and the other two machetes say cheap labor, right? And what are they about to do? They are about to martyr, because the title of the political cartoon is The Martyrdom of St. Crispin, and St. Crispin here is a honest American worker, the bedrock of the American economy, the symbol of American industry, right? And look at all these Chinese migrants taking the jobs away. Now, if this sounds familiar, the reason it sounds familiar is because this trope keeps popping up every time American industries are somehow threatened, right? It came up in the 70s as the American car industry was threatened by Japanese competitors. They're Japanese, but in the United States, it's all Asian, right? And so it came up again very recently because of the rise of the Chinese economy, right? So that wave keeps coming back, right? And and there's nothing new, right? That's a theme for those of us who study history. There's nothing new going on, right? A lot of times it's a recap of what has happened before. So that's one theme. The Chinese are taking our jobs. The other theme is that the Chinese are uncivilized womanizers, right? And you can see this in the cartoon. The title here says, "The Yellow Terror in All His Glory," right? He has this Wild West thing going on with a knife, right? Rambo going all Wild West. But what's important here is he apparently has killed a woman, right? So at the end of the day, right? You cannot trust these Chinese men with your daughters. You cannot trust these Chinese men with your wives, right? It's a very unsafe. Keep them away, right? So that's the other dimension of this. And then the third one that really matters for us is that the Chinese are anti-Western in custom and attitude, right? Now this cartoon I pulled from a book about the second reason why the church moved to Midtown. But in this cartoon, you have the title Christianized, right? And the point of it is you have the woman to the right holding a Bible under her arm. She clearly is a Christian, but she's also a missionary volunteer, right, of some church at a Chinese mission school. And because she's teaching, evangelizing to these Chinese men, this is a common sight. And you can see that there's a Chinese guy wearing Chinese clothing, squinty eyes. And the point here is that even though you convert these people, right, are they really Christian? Right? Can they really be Christian? Right? And what this cartoon suggests is, well, no matter how much you preach the gospel to these people, deep down, they're still heathens, right? You can't even trust their Christianity, right? Because they are anti-Western and cannot possibly and truly embody Christian values, right? Now, why do all these matter? Because, well, before we go to because, one issue that arises is, well, how did he respond? How did Reverend Hui respond to yellow peril, right? Because this is not new to him. Right? Well, it's interesting. This comes from his memoirs, and one of the things he notes as he was thinking through yellow peril was, well, as I now look back, I feel that we ourselves were partly to blame. Right? Now that's interesting. Why would you blame yourself for, for the racism directed against you? Well, what he's getting at is, I mean that our people were too slow in adapting ourselves to the lives of the people among whom we lived, moved, and had our material well-being. Right? We remained the clannish people. We kept to our native dress and carried on our daily lives as if we were back in our old villages in China. Right? So in this sense, all of a sudden the discussion on race becomes a lot more complicated, right? Because it's not an easy situation of, well, here's the oppressed and here's the oppressor, and the oppressed should rise up against the oppressor, right? No, in this case, we can call that the Chinese the oppressed, right? They're blaming themselves for the problem, right? So this is interesting. Why would they do that? Now, I underline the people among whom we live because one question that arises is, well, who were the people like among whom we live, right? Or in other words, what picture of America did we have in mind? Now, this picture is kind of blurry, but the Presbyterian website had only a small picture. But this is a Presbyterian Mission Board meeting, right, in New York City in 1909, right? And you can see that there's a lot of diversity. No, there's not. It's all white men. Some women there in the front row, maybe, right, for diversity. But it's all white men. And this is the world that Reverend Hui was used to, right? He ministered among these people. There were colleagues to him, right? And so this is all he knew. So for all we know, this is his vision of what America is, right? And these were the people among whom we live. And so one reasonable conclusion you can draw, and you can draw this more firmly with his other quotes and analyses, and also seeing the Presbyterian Church demographics at the time, that America for Hui is upper middle class white Protestant Christians, right? Catholics, not even in his mind. Sorry, Tom. This was New York, right, of 1909, right? So this was his idea. Now, another clue for how he responded to yellow peril comes with another interesting tidbit from his memoirs. So he was talking about the difficulty of mission work among the Chinese, and he acknowledges, yes, there was local prejudice to be overcome, but there's also the natural diffidence of the Chinese to come forward and be instructed. Right, so this is interesting. I don't know about you, but the Chinese I know aren't afraid to be instructed. Right, they like to learn. Maybe it's the crowd I hang out with. But why would he say this about his own people? Right. Well, part of it could be the ministry, the people that he's ministering to. Right. Not so many middle class Chinese folks back then. Most were poor, most were migrant workers, and so there is a class element to his comments, right, that we oftentimes miss. But he brings this up, and he talks about George Dean, who was pastor of the University Place Church, and he's told me that he himself was at first not favorably disposed to receiving Chinamen in strange Oriental garb into his church, but changed his views after he came to know us personally. So, there's the key, right? This is, now we know what Hui is thinking about his ministry. How do we get in on to become more accepted? Well, to assimilate better, right? To assimilate better and to show these white Presbyterians that we can be just like them, right? We can dress up in suits, right? We can sing the hymns, right? And it is hymns. And we can know the words to the service, right? We can do everything they can do. Now, and that means becoming more American. Now, 70 years later, there is a term for this. We call that model minority. Now, I bring this up because a lot of Asian American theologians, they must have discovered Asian American theology within the past 10 years, and they think that, wow, model minority is such a new concept. Well, if you study history, no, it's not. It's a 100-year-old concept. It's been there. They may not call it model minority, but the patterns are there. So that's one response to yellow peril. Now, so all that is one reason for why the church moved up to Midtown. But there is a second reason that's more immediate, which is called the Sigel Affair, right? So what happened? Well, in short, in 1909, there was a 20-year-old missionary volunteer at a Chinese mission of an Episcopal church, and she was found dead in the room of Liang Ling. And Liang Ling was a student of the Chinese mission, right? So all of a sudden, you just put the pieces together, right? You have a guy who disappeared, right? This case is still unsolved to this day. So he killed a woman allegedly, right? The womanizer trope comes to mind, right? And this is a student of the Chinese mission, and yet he was able to kill someone. Is he really Christian, right? How can a true Christian kill not just anybody, but a volunteer, a missionary volunteer, right? And on top of that, love letters between Sigel and Ling were found near her body, right? Oh my gosh, right? This is like fodder for the news, right? And it became a national news item. And so what all this did was to rekindle those anti-Chinese sentiments, right? Now you have evidence that everything we feared about the Chinese migrants were coming true, right? And in the churches, the immediate impact of that is, well, were the Chinese missions useful, right? Do they actually convert people, right? Are they really assimilating people? And if they can't be assimilated, if they can't be Christian, then what's the point of reaching out to the Chinese people, right? You might as well just kick them out of the country, right? So, of course, this affects Hui Kin's ministry very deeply. And so, this is 1909 when it happened. The church was founded next year. And when they were looking for a building, what were they looking for? Well, they went to the real estate agents and put in an application for a large, good building. Sounds reasonable for a church. But east side, they specified a nice location, central meaning Midtown, and desirable neighborhood, right? And Chinatown apparently was not desirable enough, right? So why did they move at the end of the day? Well, it was both to distance the church from the bad Chinese, right? We are not those Chinatown Chinese folks, right? We're the Chinese who can get along with the Americans, right? We're not them. And also to show white Americans that Chinese can be good Christian, civilized people, right? We can do it, right? We can rub shoulders, we can rub elbows with you, right? We can cooperate with you on things, right? So that is one reason why this church was placed so far from Chinatown. In some ways, they don't want to be ministering to those Chinese, right? The lower class, rabble-rousing, gambling Chinese, right? We want to be the middle class, suburban Chinese who are respectable in the community. Now, so what does this have to do with us today? Well, for my paper next month, I'll be talking about largely the implications for Asian America. right? And one important thing to keep in mind is that this is, Asian America is always changing, right? I told the story of one Chinese American church, but this is not the story of many Korean churches, definitely not the story of the Japanese Americans, right? They have internment in their stories that the Chinese did not have. And we don't need to talk about the Vietnamese, Cambodians, and all of these other Asian, and not to mention, do Indians or Palestinians count as Asians, right? So all that is a big, huge question that a lot of Asian American theologians have not addressed yet. But one thing that we need to talk about in Asian American churches is, well, even today, right, the model of ministry that Hui has begun continues to be practiced, right? The idea is to keep assimilating into this middle class, largely white worldview, right? Why? Because connection to white privilege works for material success. And why can we say that? Because if you look at the story of the Italian Americans, of the Polish Americans, I'm missing one more. Italians. Irish, yeah, that's right. I was like, I'm missing another I. So the Irish Americans, right? When they first came to the United States, they were not welcome, right? There were signs in New York City telling people, no Italians allowed, right? No, you can't work here, right? So now today you don't see Italian Americans singled out, right, for discrimination. Well, so there's been questions. How did they become white? Well, one way to become white is to be anti-black, right, or anti-brown. And this is where the folks in Asian American churches won't like to hear. Asian American churches do have an anti-black, anti-brown problem, right? And you know that because in the last election, even though the previous administration was, fostering anti-Asian sentiments, 46% of Asian Americans voted for Donald Trump, right? So why would they do that if you know that the previous administration has been critical in fostering anti-Asian sentiment? Well, because connection to white privilege works, right? We are not those liberal Asian Americans, right, who love communism or socialism, right? We are capitalists. We are supporting the American economy and things like that, right? So that explains how the complexities of Asian American politics today. But for the rest of us, right, who are, we may not be that interested in Asian American anything, what about race in general? Right, well, one conclusion that we can draw is that although racial identities can be generalized, and it has its purposes, right, for demographics, for statistical research, whatnot, right? But the problem comes when it goes to essentializing them, right? Essentializing in some ways is just oversimplifying them, right? And if you essentialize them, you will exclude voices and histories, right? And this is a problem with a lot of racial identity theologies, right? In black theology, for instance, some of you took contemporary theology, and we read James Cone, but we also read Victor Anderson, right? And Victor Anderson's critique of black theology is that a lot of the women's voices oftentimes were missing, right? And the womanist voices came out precisely to respond to that and say, yeah, the black men who were writing theologies forgot about us, right? So essentialization is something to be concerned about. But in general, right, if we want a more interesting but also complicated but accurate picture of how racial attitudes are and how racial engagements happen across boundaries, well, local histories can be a way to do that, right? Looking at the story of one church, right, one institution, right, or even one small community. All that can shed interesting light on how racial dynamics work in this country, right? And this is something that is important in the wider work of racial justice. So, this is just a small story of a small church that you could pass by easily. But as you can see, just looking at one move, right, you can uncover a lot about racial dynamics, about class issues, and how a church and wider people can respond to racial issues. So that's the story. Are there any questions? Oh.
Did you say that the church before that one was its own mission to middle white America?
It's interesting. So University Place, you were talking about the University Place Church, right? It's an interesting church. The church building is no longer there, and the congregation merged with First Presbyterian. So that's the real old Presbyterian church. And by then, NYU was already there, New York University. So that church is really a collegiate church, serving the upper crust college students of New York University. Probably still today, New York University is not a cheap school by any means. So yeah, so that's their mission. And one reason why they might be interested in starting a Chinese mission is that the age group of the migrants is roughly the same of the college students. So maybe they see a lot of parallels in that. Yeah, so it is that's an interesting church to look into more too.
But that's not that church.
No, this church this church building has its own history. This First Chinese is the third church to occupy this space. The first church was a Dutch Reformed church, in the 1860s, the congregation moved to Midtown because that's where the suburbs are, and they don't want to live downtown. So that church became a ministry for sailors, and so it's called the Sea and Land Church from 1860 to 1950. And the seaport then was only 5 blocks away. Now, what seaport, right? In 1951, so the second part of the story is that the church moved back to Chinatown because they had a new pastor, and that new pastor saying, well, what are we doing in Midtown, right? This is not where our people are. So he made a conscientious move to go back to Chinatown, which is why the church is there to this very day. Yeah.
So, I'm assuming you know about like the rape of Nanking and World War II.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So I'm basically asking, do you think the attitudes of Chinese versus Japanese Americans, like as far as obviously Japanese Americans were put in internment camps and all that, but I'm just saying that you think that Chinese Americans were played as the victim? I mean, obviously they were, but more so. You know what I mean?
Yes, no, completely. So it's a very interesting story because during Executive Order something, when the Japanese were rounded up for internment camps, the Koreans and the Chinese were concerned that they would be lumped in. So there is a picture that you can Google image it, where there was a Chinese group meeting, and they proudly put on these badges that said, I am not Jap, right? I'm not a Jap. And so in a way, right, that's one thing that a lot of Asian American theologians are missing, right? We threw each other under the bus, right? This is, we are very traitorous, within our racial category, right? So we can't just sweep that under the rug and be like, oh, there's solidarity, right? No, we threw the Japanese under the rug instead of fighting for them. Right, and so there is always that sentiment, especially during World War II, right? When you don't want to have anything, all the Chinese and Koreans want to have nothing to do with the Japanese, right? Because of they connected it with the Japanese, the Japanese, right? Even though Japanese Americans probably don't have that close a connection to Japan at the time, right? So that difficult dynamic still exists.
Yeah, the Japanese actually, I believe, considered the people that moved here,
Yeah.
like traders to the country.
Oh yeah. There's that dimension too, right? I mean, even today, right? You go, I go back to Singapore, Taiwan, right? And the expectation is I still speak Chinese. Now I do, but for folks who don't, very sad. The comments are like, oh, it's very sad when Chinese Americans can't speak Chinese, right? They don't feel sad, So, any other questions?
How long were you there? Were you there, and if this is too personal, you don't have to answer it. Were you there as a parishioner, or were you there just to study it, or both?
I was there to serve. It was my internship site.
Okay.
I started in 2011, and so they needed a youth minister, and so I filled in for them.
Oh, okay.
And they never had a pastor, so they asked me to preach all the time.
Oh.
And even to this day, because of COVID, everything's online. I preach once a month online to this church. So
You ran the church.
Huh?
You ran the church.
Sure. I didn't know. I didn't see. I don't know their books or anything, but I opened the doors. I locked the doors. So yeah.
Well, you have the keys.
Yeah. Yeah, Victor.
Was the church welcoming to non-Chinese
Now or then?
then?
Then that's an interesting question, because for them, they were always trying to reach out to their ministry field, so to speak, were always the Chinese, right? And in a way, they always saw themselves as a refuge for the Chinese people. And so the original church building had like a bowling alley, for example, and places for just folks to hang out. So they didn't see themselves as like reaching out to people of other ethnicities or races, because they're happy being a Chinese church, right? And if you're white, you wouldn't be going to a Chinese church anyways. So yeah.
As a follow-up, in 1949,
Uh-huh.
the Masterton Takeover Amendment, did the church change in the attitude towards people that they have supported Masterton, Chiang Kai-shek?
So another interesting story. So it's interesting because the Hui Kin himself was friends with not Chiang Kai-shek, but Sun Yat-sen, right, who was the founder of modern China. And in fact, he visited this church twice. They say that the constitution of Taiwan, but China at the time, was written at this church. So it's a very interesting story there. But this church is is predominantly Cantonese, and so they're Hong Kongers, right? Hong Kong is not supportive of communism, right? Until very, very recently, right? But really recently, right? But before 1997, right? They were all generally safely resistant to any forms of socialism, right? So yeah, that's an interesting part of the story. Yeah.
So, I assume that the language of the church was Chinese back in the day, but do you still speak Chinese to this church?
Chinese has many dialects, right? So this is a Cantonese church. I speak Mandarin. So, more or less we get along. They thought, it's funny because there was a Cantonese member of the congregation who came up to me and was like, Henry, I thought you were Korean all this time, right? And that's why I didn't say hello to you. I was like, wait a minute, why would you not say hello to me anyways? So it was so weird. She was an 80-year-old woman. She was very sweet. And so the dialects do matter. But I was in the English congregation, right? So that's my official dialect. So we get along. But Chinese churches oftentimes are separated by dialect. So there are Mandarin-speaking churches. In the Presbyterian church, there's a Taiwanese. There are Taiwanese churches. So that itself, it's its whole interesting story. Yeah. Yeah, Dan.
Yeah. So I think basically across the different groups in American society, the tension between the impulse to assimilate versus the impulse to maintain our traditions and things like that. is fascinating to
Oh, yeah.
see the way different groups do it.
Oh, yeah.
And so, and I think fascinating too to look at those groups that are successful, those groups that are moderately
Mhm, yeah,
successful,
mhm.
and those that are not allowed, right?
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
You know, no matter, well, I mean, not pretty much not allowed, right? But, so it seems to me, there is a book here that I think you need to write. That would look at different churches,
Oh,
right,
yeah.
as the focal point for this assimilation story, right?
Yeah.
And you know, and telling us it could be a chapter on each church.
Yeah. Well, what would be an interesting topic would be comparing this church with the San Francisco church, because they had a slightly different trajectory. Because in the 1960s there was the Yellow Power movement, right, where you know, it rode on the coattails of the Black Power movement, and the idea is like, and that's when the term Asian American was born. And of course, that's a largely West Coast thing. And the San Francisco church really got involved into that. And so someone I know at Berkeley wrote his dissertation on that church. So, but he has all the information, right? So we can work with that. But that Yellow Power movement thing didn't quite make as big of an impact on the East Coast, right? And so that sets up two different sort of trajectories of where, how two historic Chinese churches address issues of racism or white supremacy, right? It's a very interesting, comparison. Yeah.
If you could, in a short form, tell me why in recent time you see a trend in which you have Presbyterian church, Korean Presbyterian
Mhm.
church, and then 2 months after, it's no more in English, it's supposedly Korean, I can't even read it.
Yeah.
Is the Asian community consciously trying to take back their identity, or is the church creating enabling, if you will, environment for them to do that?
Yeah, that is a very interesting, and there's disagreement in the Asian American community about that. I and a bunch of others are saying that our argument is that there are different Asian groups have different ways of, whether they should take back Asian American depends on when you came into this country and how close you are to the Asian American identity. If you generally moved into the United States after 1965, the Asian American story is not, that's not your story, right? You came in already educated, you probably have a job, you probably are getting your master's, right? And you are interested in success and upward mobility, right? As opposed to racial justice, right? And all these other things that college people, professors are interested in, right? So, so it depends on the church and the generation. Younger generations of Asian Americans are more willing to claim the term than their elders, right? Which is sometimes why you see Asian churches splitting among generational lines. And so that itself is an interesting ethnographic study there.
And another reason to write this book is because the church itself historically is a primary instrument of assimilation.
Yeah, that's true.
And so if that's not, if that's
Yeah.
starting to change too, that's interesting.
Oh, that is, yeah. And in a way, that's what Europe is going through, right? In the past, the church is where, it's not just where you listen to interesting music and sermons, but after church, right, at coffee time, by the way, did you get the contract signed, right? Or other things. I mean, that was what church was, right? And that's changed now, right? What is interesting is after COVID, how has church changed now that we can just go to church on YouTube, right? In our pajamas, right? We don't have to get out of bed anymore, right? So how has that changed the nature of actually gathering and what church is for? That raises a lot of interesting questions. Okay.
So if you write this, I can help you with the Greek Orthodox Church, which
Oh,
is where I
okay.
go. I was just gonna point out the language issue that you hinted at, Dan.
Yeah.
I think that's what you were hinting at, assimilation, or at least I'm taking it to mean that, language. So we're the Greek Orthodox Church.
Mhm.
That's what we're called.
Yep.
We have a priest currently who is from Greece. He
That's so
speaks
cool.
English,
Mhm.
but not very well. So he's doing most of the service, there's COVID, and then he's doing most of the service in Greek, and people are mad. And it's causing a huge controversy.
Wow.
Well, it's like nobody talks about it, they just mutter about it and gossip about it, but it's there. And it's
Mhm.
actually a nationwide issue. How much of the service do you do in Greek? How much do you do in
Mm.
English? My point is, it's really causing a division.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like we're the Greek Orthodox Church of America. It's in Greek. It's
Yeah.
my choice if
Mhm.
I want to go there or not. It's going to be in Greek. We don't have to start on that.
Mhm.
I'm just saying within your church as well, different languages. It's a
Yeah.
bigger deal than we take into account, I think.
Yeah, and the Orthodox Church is interesting because like Orthodoxy is very much tied to national boundaries, right? So
Yeah.
there's the Greek Orthodox Church, there's the Russian
Oh,
Orthodox
yes, that,
Church,
yeah,
there's
yeah.
whether
Yeah.
Ukrainian Orthodoxy is allowed is
And they all
another-
go to our church.
Oh yeah, because like it's the only Orthodox church in the area,
Yeah.
right? So yeah,
No, there's
everyone.
a few, but they want English.
Oh,
But he's from
Yeah.
Greece.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And those-
Anyway,
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
just saying language
Mhm.
is huge.
Oh, very much so.
Not
Yeah.
just in the Greek Orthodox Church, in many
Yeah.
churches.
Judaism as well, most of the service is in Hebrew, and that's why you
Oh.
have the conservative and the reform.
Yeah, yeah, it splits
They're
people.
split.
Yeah.
It splits.
And you can see that split in New York. There are synagogues that don't talk to each other. Yeah, there's
We've
a
got two people we can interview.
yeah. It's
You can
very
interview both
interesting
of
because
us.
like this church is
I didn't know if you
located
were, yeah.
a few blocks from like one of the most conservative Jewish synagogues in New York. So it's so weird, you know, walking from the subway station to church and you passing by a lot of Hasidic Jews drinking coffee outside. So it's a very interesting neighborhood, certainly. Okay, nothing else?
No, so interesting.
Okay. Thank you for being here.